I'm Jennifer Lee. I'm a pediatric cardiologist. I'm the division chief of pediatric cardiology at Duke University Medical Center. I have a long-standing research interest in drug studies for children, and I was fortunate to be involved in a recent Institute of Medicine report evaluating safe and effective medicines for children. Well, historically, children have been therapeutic orphans in drug studies and drug evaluation, and there's been a paucity of labeling for drugs for children. About 75% of drugs have not been labeled for children, and so that means that we don't really know the dose or the safety or efficacy of a lot of drugs that are given to children. In order to fill this gap, starting in 1997, there have been some legislative actions which have tried to incentivize as well as mandate some needed studies to improve drug labeling for child health. The two main pieces of legislation in play are the Best Pharmaceutical for Children's Act as well as the Pediatric Research Equity Act. And these provisions typically sunset every 5 years, and so both of these pieces of legislation are up for renewal in Congress this year for the next 5-year cycle. And so because of this, Congress asked the Food and Drug Administration to, in conjunction with the Institute of Medicine, to look at the impact of this legislation over time in view of this upcoming renewal. Well, the committee was charged with certain tasks, and the main order of business was to look at what has been accomplished over time, so we looked at a lot of labeling changes. We looked at a lot of written requests that were issued to pharmaceutical companies from the Food and Drug Administration. We looked at the impact of some of the labeling changes on child health. We looked at not only drugs, but biologics. The key findings were that this legislation has done enormous things for child health, and there have been over 400 labeling changes for children, and the impact of this has been very favorable. But there are areas for improvement. Some of these include looking at studies in some populations that aren't as well studied, particularly premature infants, and the other gap that we acknowledged was that some of the studies really are fairly short term, so they're not looking at long-term safety and efficacy effects. And this is important in children because of issues with growth and development, and some of these children, stay on these drugs for long periods of time, and sometimes clinical trials don't really assess that, and so there's a need for further longer-term safety studies. And in particular, in terms of classes of drugs, drugs that are older and where the patent has expired, those have not been as studied as effectively. Well, the committee had a number of recommendations. First, the committee felt that there could be some improvements in looking at the transparency of the process. There are times when information is available to the public. There are times when the information it can be proprietary and it's not available, but and a lot of times once the FDA makes their evaluation of a clinical trial, sometimes that's not always publicly available, and some of the summaries they are on the FDA website, but some summaries are not as complete as others, and so the committee recommended that there be some more transparency about the process. The committee also recommended that that Congress look into the frequent sunsetting of this because that process in itself can be difficult for the Food and Drug Administration, as well as trial sponsors, because some of these studies are very long and complex, and when you're not sure what's going to happen with the legislation, that can be an issue. And then in terms of the studies themselves, the committee felt like that there should be more attention paid to neonates, as well as long-term safety and efficacy in children, and that the overall timing of the studies could be done earlier in the United States.